In that fateful summer, due to a scorching drought and crop failure, a terrible phantom of disaster haunted the people's memory for many years to come. Already in June and July, rare downpours sparingly irrigated the thirsty fields, but as soon as the calendar turned to August, the sky ceased to drop even a single drop of moisture on the earth. Even here, in the elevated Tyrolean valley, where I, like many, hoped to find shelter in the coolness, the saffron-yellow air was permeated with blazing heat and dust. From early morning, the yellow sun rose in the empty sky and dully cast its feverish gaze upon the faded earth. The hours dragged on, a whitish oppressive steam rose from the copper cauldron of the midday heat, and a languor took hold of the entire valley. In the distance, the Dolomites majestically loomed, and the snow on their peaks, fresh and pure, pleased the eye with its dazzling brilliance, a reminder of coolness. It was painful to look at them and dream of the wind that might be caressing those heights, while here, in the heated basin, a greedy heat devoured all moisture day and night with 1,000 lips. Movement and life gradually died out in this dying world of withered grasses, stunted greenery, and dried-up streams. The hours dragged on slowly and lazily. I, like many others, whiled away the endless days in a room with the curtains drawn, half-dressed, in a listless anticipation of change, in a dull and helpless longing for rain and a thunderstorm. But soon this desire also faded, giving way to a sleepy apathy into which both the dried-up grasses and the forest, frozen motionless under a shroud of steam, had sunk. With each passing day, the heat intensified, and still there was no rain. From morning to evening, the sun baked without a break, its yellow, tormenting gaze resembled the dull persistence of a madman. It seemed that life itself was ready to stop, everything fell silent, the animals fell quiet, and only from the whitened fields came a quiet, ringing hum in the sultry haze, and the buzzing boiling of a burning nature. I intended to go into the forest, where blue shadows shimmered between the trees. There I could lie down and take cover from that yellow persistent gaze. But even those few steps seemed tiring. And so I continued to sit in a straw chair in front of the hotel entrance, squeezed into a narrow strip of shade from the roof's overhang. When the shadow contracted and the sun crept up to my hands, I would move back a little, then lean back again in the chair and dully stare into the blinding glare, without a sense of time, without desires and will. Time blurred in the stuffiness, the hours dissolved in meaningless sultry dreams. I felt only the scorching touch of the air outside and the feverish beating of blood inside. And suddenly, it seemed as if a light gust had swept through from somewhere, a very, very quiet one, like the hot sigh of an exhausted nature. I listened intently. Was it the wind? I had already forgotten what it was like. My parched lungs had not inhaled its coolness in a long time. Not yet feeling its touch in my shaded corner, I noticed that the trees on the hillside must have sensed its approach. They began to rustle, whispering to each other. The shadows between them came to life, flitting about, and suddenly, somewhere high up, a low, vibrating sound rang out. Yes, the wind was sweeping through the valley. A whisper and a rustle arose, a hum and a movement. The noise intensified, like the rising hum of an organ, and then, a powerful gust. Smoky clouds of dust swirled above the road and rushed in one direction. Birds, hiding in the shade, took flight, flashing like black spots in the air. Horses snorted, shaking foam from their nostrils, and in the distance, cattle mooed and bleated in the meadow. Something mighty had awakened and was approaching. The earth, the forest, and the animals felt this force, and the sky was veiled with a light grey haze. I was trembling with excitement. My blood was boiling from the stings of the heat, my nerves were stretched to the limit. Never before had I felt such a passionate desire for a thunderstorm, such exhilaration from a gust of wind. It was coming. It was growing, creeping up, ready to break at any minute. The wind pushed soft clumps of clouds, and something puffed and groaned behind the mountains, as if someone was rolling an unbearable weight. Sometimes the noise would subside, as if from fatigue, and then the fir trees would tremble quietly, and my heart would tremble with them. Everywhere was tense anticipation. The earth had opened cracks, like little mouths, thirsty for moisture, and my pores opened just the same, ready to receive the coolness and the trembling sweetness of the rain. My fingers clenched convulsively, as if trying to grab the rushing clouds and force them to pour down on the languishing world. And now they were advancing lazily, pushed by an invisible hand, like round, swollen sacks, black, heavy with rainwater, colliding and grumbling. They knocked against each other dully, like cumbersome, solid objects. A faint lightning flash, like a struck match, flickered across their somber surface, and a menacing blue light flashed above them. Closer and closer they drew together, darker and darker loomed their mountainous weight. Like an iron curtain in a theater, the leaden sky descended lower and lower. Now the entire horizon was hidden behind a black veil, the warm air hung motionless and thick. The final moments of waiting arrived, silent and ominous. Everything was suppressed by the black mass hanging over the abyss. The birds fell silent, the trees stood breathless, and even the slender blades of grass dared not stir. The sky, like a metal coffin, covered the sultry world, where everything had frozen in anticipation of the first lightning. Holding my breath, I stood, my hands clenched convulsively, filled with sweet anxiety, unable to move. I heard the movement of people behind me, someone hurrying from the forest, someone coming out of the hotel doors, the maids lowering the blinds and slamming the windows shut with a bang. Suddenly, everything came into motion, bustle, voices, quick steps, preparation for something inevitable. I alone remained motionless, silent, trembling as if with fever. The tense anticipation was about to burst forth in a cry. It was already rising in my throat, a cry of rapture in greeting to the first lightning. And suddenly I heard a sigh behind me, torn from an exhausted chest, and interwoven with it, a pleading cry. Oh, for rain! So wild and spontaneous was this voice, this burst of restrained feeling, as if the cracked lips of the thirsty earth had uttered this moan, as if the tormented landscape itself, suffocating under the oppressive weight of the leaden sky, had expelled it from its depths. I turned around. Behind me stood a girl, obviously the one who had spoken these words. Her delicately outlined lips were still half open, and the hand holding onto the doorframe trembled slightly. These words were not addressed to me, nor to anyone else. As if poised above an abyss, she leaned over the landscape. Her fixed gaze did not reflect the darkness hanging over the fir tops. Empty and fathomless was this gaze, fixedly directed into the depths of the sky. It stretched upward greedily, into the thickened clouds, into the approaching storm. It was as if she did not notice me. I could calmly examine the stranger, how her chest rose, how some force compressed her from within, how a light tremor ran down her delicate neck, how her thirsty lips trembled and then parted, and again the words rang out. Oh, for rain! And again these words sounded like the sigh of the entire earth languishing in the heat. She stood as if in a dream, her gaze frozen in space, and her appearance, white in her light garment against the leaden sky, seemed the living embodiment of nature's thirst and longing. Something rustled softly in the grass. Something tapped on the cornice. Something crunched in the hot gravel. A light rustle spread everywhere. And suddenly I understood. Drops were falling, heavy, blessed harbingers of a great, noisy, refreshing rain. Yes, it's starting. It has begun. A kind of sweet intoxication, a blissful drunkenness, took hold of me. I came to life, jumped up, held out my hand, and a heavy, cool drop fell on my fingers. I tore off my hat to feel more keenly the touch of the moisture-laden air on my hair and forehead. I trembled with impatience, to feel this noise all around, to receive its moisture upon myself, into my open pores, down to my fevered blood. The drops were still sparse, but I was already anticipating the weight of the untamed torrent, already hearing the roar of the open celestial sluices, already living in the bliss of that moment when the sky would burst open above the forest, above the scorching, exhausted world. But strangely, the drops did not become more frequent. They could be counted, 1, 1, 1, 1. From all sides came a light whistling, a dry crunch, a low buzzing, but all these sounds never merged into a harmonious chorus of the exultant music of rain. Timidly, slowly, the drops fell, one after another, less and less frequent and quieter, and suddenly the noise finally ceased. It was as if a ticking clock had suddenly stopped, and time itself stood still. My heart, heated with impatience, grew numb. I waited, but in vain. The sky, its stern brow furrowed, looked on motionless and somber. For a few moments, a dead silence reigned, and it seemed to me that a faint, mocking smile spread across its face. In the west, the heights grew brighter, the wall of clouds began to slowly part, with a barely audible rustle, they floated away. The celestial blue became deeper and more transparent, and the awakening nature, merging with the clarified horizon, seemed to be seized by a bitter feeling of loss. An angry tremor ran through the crowns of the trees, they seemed to hunch over, lowering their green arms, which had so recently been greedily outstretched to the sky, and were now petrified. The cloudy veil became more and more transparent, and a malevolent, sinister clarity reigned over the powerless world. Everything fell silent. The storm had dissipated. I was trembling all over. Anger boiled within me, a senseless indignation at powerlessness and betrayed hopes, a rage against the betrayal of the elements. I wanted to scream, to thrash about, to break things, to do something evil, something fatal. I was seized by a reckless thirst for revenge. I felt the torment of all of disappointed nature, the languor of every blade of grass, the heat of the streets and the forest, the warmth of the heated stone, the thirst of the entire deceived world. My nerves were stretched like wire, I could feel them glowing with electricity under my skin. Everything hurt, every sound was a prick, every glance a burn. My being, to its very depths, was seized by a fever. I felt how hidden instincts had opened up, like hundreds of tiny nostrils, and each one was inhaling fire. I no longer distinguished where my own agitation ended and where the agitation of the world around me began. The thin partition of sensations that separated us was torn, everything merged into one feeling, bright, burning, agonizing. I fixed my gaze on the valley, where the first lights were flickering, and it seemed as if every little light was flaring up inside me, and every star was searing my skin. A fiery excitement reigned in me and around me. I could almost physically feel how everything around me was swelling, thickening in my chest and flaring up beyond it. It seemed to me that a mysterious living seed was burning, one for all, in a multitude of beings. I felt with a sharp, almost painful clarity the anger of every leaf, the dull gaze of the dog that was wandering by the door with its tail down. I felt everything, and everything hurt. I could almost physically feel the heat around me. Touching the door with my fingers, I seemed to hear it hiss like tinder, and the air smelled of burning. A gong rang, calling to dinner. The metallic sound echoed within me with a painful vibration. I turned around. Where had all the people who had recently languished here in anxiety and anticipation disappeared to? Where was she, the one who had stood there like the embodiment of the exhausted world? In the confusion of the last few minutes, I had forgotten about her. Everything was gone. I was alone amidst the silent nature. Once more I cast my gaze over the heights and the distances. The sky was empty and hazy, the stars were glimmering dimly through a taut veil, and the rising moon shone with the malevolent, predatory gleam of a cat's eye. Above, it was dull and mocking, sinister. Below, under the deceptive firmament, night was approaching, saturated with a phosphorescent light, like a tropical sea, breathing painfully and voluptuously, like a disappointed woman. For the last time, the fading rays played on the peaks, and below, a stuffy, viscous darkness was already spreading. Two depths, the sky and the earth, gazed at each other with hostility, locked in a silent, eerie struggle. My breathing quickened, I was absorbing this excitement. I touched the grass, it was dry as wood and crunched between my fingers. Then the gong sounded again. This dead sound was a burden to me. I did not want to eat, I did not want to see people, but the loneliness and stuffiness on the terrace were becoming unbearable. The leaden sky pressed heavily on my chest, and I knew that I could no longer endure this weight. I went into the dining room. Everyone was already sitting at their tables. They were talking quietly, but even this muffled noise was too sharp for my ears. Everything was becoming agonizing, everything was irritating my strained nerves, the light rustle of lips, the clinking of knives and forks, the rattling of plates, every gesture, every breath, every glance. Everything touched me, everything hurt. I had to restrain myself from doing something insane. From the rapid beating of my pulse, I knew, I was in the grip of a fever. I looked at each of the people present and felt a hatred for each of them. How could these satiated people sit so calmly and peacefully when I was burning as if on fire? Envy seized me at the sight of their satiated and confident calm, indifferent to the torments of an entire world, to the helpless anger that was boiling in the chest of the languishing earth. I glanced around at everyone. Would there be at least one sympathetic soul? But there was no anxiety in their eyes. Only relaxed, balanced people were gathered here, cheerful, insensitive, healthy. And only I, sick, seized by the feverish heat of the universe. My dinner was served. I tried to eat, but the food would not go down my throat. Any touch became unbearable. I was overflowing with the stuffiness and fumes of a suffering, sick, exhausted nature. Someone pulled up a chair next to me. I shuddered, every sound scorched me like a red-hot iron. I turned around. Unfamiliar people were sitting at the table, new neighbors whom I had not yet seen. An elderly gentleman with his wife, petty bourgeois and balanced, with round, calm eyes and mouths occupied with unhurried chewing. But opposite them, a little sideways to me, sat a young girl, probably their daughter. I saw only a thin white neck, and above it, like a steel helmet, thick, bluish-black, luxurious hair. She sat motionless, and this stupor told me, yes, this was the same girl who had stood on the terrace behind me and waited for rain like a wilting white flower. Her small, sickly fragile, restless fingers noiselessly played with a knife and fork, and the peace that surrounded her had a calming effect on me. She also did not touch her food, only once, quickly and greedily, did she grab a glass. By this sharp movement, I joyfully guessed, she, too, was in the grip of the world's fever. My gaze gently and sympathetically touched her neck. Here she was, the only person in this entire crowd who was not detached from nature, who was a part of the world's fire. I wanted to give her a sign of our invisible brotherhood. I wanted to shout, "Feel me! I am burning too, I am suffering too! Hear me!" I surrounded her with the magnetic flame of my desire, fixed my gaze on her back, mentally caressed her hair, called to her with my lips, drew her to me with my imagination. I did not take my eyes off her, sending all my feverish heat in the hope of a response. But she did not turn around. She remained motionless as a statue, cold and alien. No one wanted to help me. Even she did not hear. And in her appearance, I found no reflection of the world's torment. I was burning alone. I could no longer bear this suffocating, all-encompassing stuffiness. The smell of warm, greasy, and cloying dishes tormented me, every rustle got on my nerves. My blood was boiling, I was close to fainting. Everything merged into one hopeless languor for coolness and space. The cramped proximity of people was oppressive. The window was nearby. I threw it wide open. And strangely, once again, everything was shrouded in mystery, and the restless flashes in my blood dissolved into the boundless expanse of the night sky. The moon shone as a pale yellow spot, like an inflamed eye in a red ring of smoke, and a ghostly pale fog wandered over the fields. Crickets chirped feverishly, as if taut metal strings were making their piercing ringing sound. Occasionally, for no reason at all, the croak of a toad was heard, dogs barked and let out an ominous howl, somewhere far away, animals roared. And I remembered, on such nights, the fever even poisons the milk of cows. Nature seemed sick, in its appearance lay the same furious malice that also burned my soul. I looked out the window as if into a mirror that reflected my own feelings. My entire being was drawn there, into the depths of this moist, heavy embrace, where the heaviness that was pressing down on me merged with the oppression of the earth itself. Again, chairs next to me creaked and moved, I shuddered. Dinner was over, and people got up from their places, talking loudly. My neighbors also got up and, one by one, walked past. First went the father, satiated, imperturbable, with a friendly smile on his face. He was followed by the mother, who walked smoothly, and then, their daughter. Only now did I see her face. It was a pale yellow, like the dull light of a sick moon. Her lips, slightly parted, breathed the same weariness. She stepped silently, but in her gait there was a heaviness, a listlessness, almost an exhaustion, so similar to my own. I felt her approach and suddenly became anxious. A desire awoke in me to go up to her, to touch her light white dress, to inhale the scent of her thick, cold hair. And suddenly, she looked at me. Her cold, gloomy gaze pierced me and remained somewhere inside, like a black shadow, blocking out the light image. I felt as if I was falling into an abyss. One more step, and this gaze, like a sharp spear, plunged directly into my heart. For a brief moment, its steel tip lingered there, stopping its beating. A few seconds, just a few moments, she looked at me, and I, holding my breath, felt like a prisoner of the black magnet of her pupils. She walked past. And immediately it seemed to me that hot blood had burst from the wound, spreading through my body, scorching me. What was that? A dream, a feverish delusion? Could I have gotten so lost in a casually thrown glance? Or did I read in it the same silent frenzy, the same draining, insane thirst that I imagined everywhere, in the gaze of the red moon, in the parched lips of the earth, in the anxious cries of nocturnal animals? Everything merged in this stuffy, bewitching night into one unbearable anticipation. Was it my madness, or that of the whole world? I was shaking with excitement, and, unable to resist, I followed her onto the terrace. She was sitting next to her parents, leaning back in her chair, calm, almost motionless. Her lowered eyelids hid her dangerous, elusive gaze. In her hands was a book. But I did not believe in this reading. If she, like me, was languishing under the weight of the senseless torment of the world, she could not serenely immerse herself in the pages. It was just a game, a hiding from other people's eyes. I sat down opposite her, staring at her intently, feverishly waiting for her gaze to return and give away its secret. But she did not stir. Her fingers indifferently turned page after page, and her eyes remained lowered. I waited. I waited with a burning, almost painful impatience. Some invisible but powerful force tensed in me, like a muscle ready to break through her feigned calmness. In the midst of the lively crowd, talking, smoking, playing cards, a silent but tense struggle was taking place between us. I felt that she was deliberately avoiding my gaze, but the more stubborn her resistance, the stronger my desire became. I was confident in my strength, because behind me stood the anticipation of the entire languishing earth, the entire scorching heat of the deceived world. And as the moist stuffiness of the night enveloped my body, so my will pressed on her will. I knew she would not hold out. She had to look. But strangely, the drops did not become more frequent, they could be counted, 1, 1, 1, 1. From all sides came a light whistling, a dry crunch, a low buzzing, but all these sounds never merged into a harmonious chorus of the exultant music of rain. Timidly, slowly, the drops fell, one after another, less and less frequent and quieter, and suddenly the noise finally ceased. It was as if a ticking clock had suddenly stopped, and time itself stood still. My heart, heated with impatience, grew numb. I waited, but in vain. The sky, its stern brow furrowed, looked on motionless and somber. For a few moments, a dead silence reigned, and it seemed to me that a faint, mocking smile spread across its face. In the west, the heights grew brighter, the wall of clouds began to slowly part, with a barely audible rustle, they floated away. The celestial blue became deeper and more transparent, and the awakening nature, merging with the clarified horizon, seemed to be seized by a bitter feeling of loss. An angry tremor ran through the crowns of the trees, they seemed to hunch over, lowering their green arms, which had so recently been greedily outstretched to the sky, and were now petrified. The cloudy veil became more and more transparent, and a malevolent, sinister clarity reigned over the powerless world. Everything fell silent. The storm had dissipated. I was trembling all over. Anger boiled within me, a senseless indignation at powerlessness and betrayed hopes, a rage against the betrayal of the elements. I wanted to scream, to thrash about, to break things, to do something evil, something fatal. I was seized by a reckless thirst for revenge. I felt the torment of all of disappointed nature, the languor of every blade of grass, the heat of the streets and the forest, the warmth of the heated stone, the thirst of the entire deceived world. My nerves were stretched like wire, I could feel them glowing with electricity under my skin. Everything hurt, every sound was a prick, every glance a burn. My being, to its very depths, was seized by a fever. I felt how hidden instincts had opened up, like hundreds of tiny nostrils, and each one was inhaling fire. I no longer distinguished where my own agitation ended and where the agitation of the world around me began. The thin partition of sensations that separated us was torn, everything merged into one feeling, bright, burning, agonizing. I fixed my gaze on the valley, where the first lights were flickering, and it seemed as if every little light was flaring up inside me, and every star was searing my skin. A fiery excitement reigned in me and around me. I could almost physically feel how everything around me was swelling, thickening in my chest and flaring up beyond it. It seemed to me that a mysterious living seed was burning, one for all, in a multitude of beings. I felt with a sharp, almost painful clarity the anger of every leaf, the dull gaze of the dog that was wandering by the door with its tail down. I felt everything, and everything hurt. I could almost physically feel the heat around me. Touching the door with my fingers, I seemed to hear it hiss like tinder, and the air smelled of burning. A gong rang, calling to dinner. The metallic sound echoed within me with a painful vibration. I turned around. Where had all the people who had recently languished here in anxiety and anticipation disappeared to? Where was she, the one who had stood there like the embodiment of the exhausted world? In the confusion of the last few minutes, I had forgotten about her. Everything was gone. I was alone amidst the silent nature. Once more I cast my gaze over the heights and the distances. The sky was empty and hazy, the stars were glimmering dimly through a taut veil, and the rising moon shone with the malevolent, predatory gleam of a cat's eye. Above, it was dull and mocking, sinister. Below, under the deceptive firmament, night was approaching, saturated with a phosphorescent light, like a tropical sea, breathing painfully and voluptuously, like a disappointed woman. For the last time, the fading rays played on the peaks, and below, a stuffy, viscous darkness was already spreading. Two depths, the sky and the earth, gazed at each other with hostility, locked in a silent, eerie struggle. My breathing quickened. I was absorbing this excitement. I touched the grass, it was dry as wood and crunched between my fingers. Suddenly something put me on alert. I strained all my strength, but I could not come to my senses. And then I understood, half lying with my eyes closed, I had fallen asleep. I must have slept for an hour, or even 2, the light on the hotel terrace had gone out, and everything around had sunk into sleep. My damp hair was sticking to my temples, like hot dew. This deep, dreamless sleep had descended upon me. I got up, deciding to find my way back to the house. My senses were confused, and everything around me was just as confused. In the distance, there was a muffled rumble, and rare sheet lightning flashed anxiously in the sky. The air was saturated with the brilliance of sparks. Behind the mountains, lightning flashed treacherously, and within me, memories, mixed with premonitions, glowed phosphorescently. I would have gladly stayed here to come to my senses and surrender to the sweet unraveling of the mystery of my sensations. But the hour was late, and I went in. The terrace was empty. The chairs stood in disarray in the dim candlelight. This mute emptiness seemed ghostly, and involuntarily I seated in one of the chairs the delicate silhouette of the strange creature that had disturbed me with her gaze. In the depths of my soul, that gaze still lived. It was mobile, and I could feel it shining from the darkness. A mysterious premonition felt it here, within these walls, and it wandered in my blood as a vague anticipation. I was becoming breathless. As soon as I closed my eyes, red sparks flashed under my eyelids. The white, sultry day was still alive in me. This damp, sparkling, fantastic night was still trembling. But it was impossible to stay on the terrace, it was too dark and lonely. Reluctantly, I moved up the stairs. A strange resistance lived in me that I could not cope with. I was tired, but it seemed that it was too early to sleep. Some vague clairvoyance promised an adventure, and a desire to see something living, something warming, awoke in me. It seemed as if I had grown thin tentacles. As I made my way up the stairs, I seemed to touch all the rooms, and just as all my senses had previously been directed toward nature, they now stretched inward toward the house. I could feel the sleep and calm breathing of a multitude of people, the heavy circulation of their thick, almost black blood, their good-natured peace, the silence, and at the same time the presence of some magnetic force. It seemed to me that here, nearby, someone was awake with me. Was it that gaze, was it nature itself, that was pouring this subtle, burning madness into me? I felt as if through the walls I was being touched by something soft. A small restless light flickered in me, teasing my blood and not going out. I ascended reluctantly, stopping on each step and listening, not only with my hearing, but with my entire being. Nothing could surprise me, everything within me was awaiting the unprecedented, the unheard of. I knew that this night would not end without something wonderful, that the stuffiness must inevitably burst with lightning. Once again, standing at the railing, I felt within me the entire exhausted world, thirsty for a thunderstorm. But nothing stirred. Only a quiet breathing wandered through the sleeping house. Tired and disappointed, I went up the last steps. My lonely room frightened me like a coffin. The damp, warm doorknob gleamed dully in the darkness. I entered. The window was thrown wide open, and in it a black square of night, the tops of dense fir trees and a piece of the cloudy sky between them. Darkness stood both outside and inside, in the world and in the room. But strangely, something narrow and straight was glowing at the window frame, as if a lost strip of moonlight. I approached, wanting to understand what was shining so brightly in the moonless night. And suddenly the bright spot moved. I was surprised, but not frightened. On this magical night, I was ready for the most fantastic events. Everything had already been anticipated, everything had been revealed in a dream. No meeting could have struck me, and least of all this one. Yes, it was she, the one I had unconsciously thought of on every step, with every stride through this sleeping house, whose wakefulness I had felt through the walls and doors. She stood, shrouded as if in fog, in a light nightgown. Leaning against the window and with her entire being turned toward nature, she seemed to be a reflection in the shimmering mirror of its mysterious abyss. A fairy tale, a vision. Ophelia above a pond. I came closer, confused and agitated. The noise must have reached her ears. She turned. Her face remained in shadow. I did not know if she saw me, if she heard my footsteps. There was no abruptness, no fright, no resistance in her movement. Everything around us was drowned in silence. Only the muffled ticking of a pocket watch hanging on the wall disturbed this peace. And then, barely audible and unexpected, words sounded in this silence. "I'm so afraid." To whom was she speaking? Did she recognize me? Or was it a whisper born of sleep? The same voice, the same trembling tone that had sounded today on the terrace at the sight of the approaching clouds, even before our gazes met. All of this seemed strange, but I felt neither surprise nor embarrassment. I came closer, wanting to reassure her, and took her hand. The hand was hot and dry, like tinder. Her fingers moved weakly in my palm. Everything in her was languid, helpless, as if lifeless. Only her lips again whispered, as if from afar, "I'm afraid. I'm so afraid." And she sighed softly, with a sob. "Oh, it's so stuffy." These words, barely discernible, as if spoken at a distance, sounded like a secret shared only between us. But I clearly felt, they were not addressed to me. I squeezed her hand tighter. She did not resist, only trembled slightly, as the branches of trees tremble in anticipation of a thunderstorm. I embraced her. Without the slightest resistance, like a warm, falling wave, her shoulders touched my chest. Now, at last, I was touching her. I inhaled the sultry scent of her skin, the damp smell of her hair. I did not move, she remained silent. My curiosity grew. My impatience intensified. I touched her hair with my lips, she did not pull away. Then I kissed her lips. They were dry and hot, but as soon as my lips touched them, they suddenly parted, as if absorbing moisture, without thirst, without passion, like the lips of a child, calmly and languidly drinking milk. I felt the complete languor of her being. Just like her lips, her slender, warm, trembling body under the light garment clung to me, resembling the touch of the night, powerless, calm, but full of rapture and a hidden thirst. Holding her in my arms, I felt as if I was embracing the entire huge, stuffy, languid world. It seemed that the heat of her cheeks was the evaporation of the scorched fields, and her soft breast was breathing the earth itself, languishing in anticipation of rain. And so, when my lips were about to touch her eyelids, her eyes, whose black gleam I so keenly felt, I raised my head to look at her face. I was amazed to see, her eyelids were tightly closed. Like an ancient mask, carved from stone, without eyes, without breath, she rested in my arms, Ophelia, but already dead, floating on black waves with a pale, lifeless face. Fear seized me. For the first time, I felt the reality of this fantastic scene. I realized with horror, I was holding a sleeping person in my arms, a somnambulist, brought to me only by the stuffiness of the night and the sinister light of the red moon, a being unaware of her actions and, perhaps, not wanting me at all. The weight of her body was pressing on me. I wanted to carefully seat her in a chair or on the bed, so as not to deprive her of involuntary but, perhaps, unwanted pleasures, not to take advantage of the madness that was wandering in her blood. But, feeling that I was pulling away, she pleaded in a whisper. "Don't leave me. Don't leave me." Her lips bit down even more hotly, her body pressed even more tightly against me. Her face, with its closed eyes, was contorted with suffering, and with horror I realized, she was trying to wake up, she wanted to, but she was unable to, her intoxicated consciousness was tearing itself from the prison of sleep, striving towards the light. And it was this stirring under the leaden mask of slumber, this desperate attempt to break free from her enchanted captivity, that awoke in me a dangerous and tempting desire to wake her up. I was burning with impatience to see her awake, speaking, alive, not just a somnambulist. At all costs, I wanted to awaken this unconsciously enjoying body to life. I pulled her towards me, shook her, sank my teeth into her lips, squeezed her hands with my fingers, wanting to force her to open her eyes and consciously surrender to what her unconscious passion was drawing her to. But she only writhed and groaned painfully in my clutches. More, she mumbled, with a plea, senseless and all the more agonizingly thrilling, that deprived me of my reason. I felt that her awakening was close, that it was tearing its way out from under her trembling, tightly closed eyelids. I pressed her to me more and more strongly, and suddenly I felt tears roll from her eyes, the salty moisture of which touched my lips. Her chest rose more and more often, her groans intensified, her hands clenched convulsively, as if wanting to tear the ring of sleep that bound them, and suddenly, like a lightning flash in a world saturated with a thunderstorm, something broke within her. She again became an immovable weight, her lips detached from mine, her arms fell limply, and when I laid her on the bed, she lay as if dead. I was frightened. I cautiously touched her hands, her cheeks, they were cold, petrified, like marble. Only in her temples did her blood barely tremble. Sometimes a weak, trembling response ran through her body, like a receding wave of heat, but her breathing became more and more even, more and more quiet. She was becoming more and more like a statue, and the features of her face softened, became clear, almost childlike. The convulsions had gone, she was dozing, she was sleeping. I remained sitting on the edge of the bed, leaning over her. She lay calmly, with a slight smile on her lips, as if captive to a pleasant dream. I could make out every line of her face, feel her breath on my cheek, and the closer I was to her, the more distant and mysterious she seemed. Where did the thoughts of the one who had so recently been brought to me, a stranger, as if by a hot wave of night, now rest, as if washed ashore? Who was she, where was she from? I knew nothing about her and understood that there were no ties between us. I peered into her face in the silence, broken only by the hurried ticking of a clock, trying to unravel the mystery, in vain. I wanted to wake her up here, in my room, to erase the wall of alienation erected between us, but at the same time I was afraid of her first conscious glance. So I sat for an hour, or maybe two, guarding the sleep of a creature alien to me. And gradually, it began to seem to me that it was not a woman, but the night itself, having appeared in the guise of a messenger of a languishing, thirsty nature. It was as if the entire world, exhausted by the heat, had spread out before me, and the earth, rising in torment, had sent her as a herald of this amazing night. Suddenly something rang out behind me. I started like a criminal caught in the act. The window rattled again, as if a huge fist had hit it. I jumped up. Beyond the glass, a transformed night stretched out, menacing, sparkling in the gloom, full of wild movement. Howling, rustling, whistling filled it, forming a black tower that merged with the sky. A cold, damp wind rushed towards me, beating its fists against the windows and doors. The darkness opened up like a monstrous maw, the clouds, carried by the hurricane, lined up in impregnable walls. Between the sky and the earth, an ominous howl sounded. The stubborn stuffiness was torn apart by this furious torrent. Everything around was tossing, widening, running in a furious whirlwind. The trees, rooted deep in the ground, groaned under the whistling scourge of the wind. And suddenly the clouds parted, a lightning bolt, splitting the sky in half, struck the earth, and a peal of thunder followed, as if the tower of clouds itself had collapsed into the abyss. A commotion sounded behind me. She raised herself up. The lightning tore the veil of sleep from her eyes. Looking around in a daze, she asked, "What is this? Where am I?" Her voice sounded completely different. Fear still trembled in it, but at the same time, it became clear, sharp, and pure like the air after a thunderstorm. Again, a celestial discharge flashed, snatching from the darkness the outlines of fir trees, shaken by the storm, the clouds, racing across the sky like maddened beasts, and the room, illuminated by a white, dazzling light. But paler than anything was her pale face. She abruptly jumped up. An unusual freedom appeared in her movements. I had never seen her like this before. She stared at me intently in the darkness, and her gaze seemed darker than the night to me. "Who are you? Where am I?" she said, hastily wrapping her gown, which had opened at her chest. I stepped forward to reassure her, but she deftly slipped away. "What do you want from me?" she cried when I approached. I tried to find the words to talk to her, and suddenly I realized that I did not even know her name. Another lightning bolt lit up the walls with a phosphorescent gleam. She stood before me, pale, with her hands stretched out in fright, and boundless hatred shone in her awakened gaze. But my attempts to touch her or explain myself were drowned in thunder and darkness. She broke free, threw open the door, which was filled with a flash of light, and ran out. At that very moment, the door slammed shut, and in unison with this, thunder struck, as if the heavens had collapsed to the earth. A noise arose, streams plunged from a dizzying height like waterfalls, and the hurricane threw them, like wet ropes, from side to side. Sometimes it threw icy jets of water and the sweetish, intoxicating aroma of fresh air into the windows. I stood by the window until water dripped from my soaked hair. But what a bliss it was, to breathe in the living element. It seemed that the heat that had exhausted me had been dispersed in these lightning flashes, and I wanted to scream with delight. I forgot about everything. I breathed in the freshness and strength with a full chest, absorbing the coolness like the earth and the fields. I felt the trembling joy of the trees, shaking under the blows of the rain. This passionate struggle of the sky and the earth was demonically beautiful, like a gigantic wedding night, a triumph in which my soul participated. Lightning flashed in the heights, crashing with thunder onto the trembling earth. In this darkness, the furious fusion of height and depth was accomplished. The trees groaned as if in a sweet impulse, lightning flashes more and more often wove into the distance, and the celestial veins poured out, joining with the streams of the roads. Everything was mixed up, the night and the world. A new breath, in which the aroma of the fields and the heated breath of the storm merged, penetrated into me, bringing coolness and purification. 3 weeks of accumulated heat exploded in this storm, and I felt the release within myself as well. It seemed that the downpour was penetrating every pore, and the whirlwind was washing my chest. I was myself, and the hurricane, and the rain, and the night itself, the embodiment of everything living in the turbulent exaltation of nature. Gradually, everything began to calm down. Lightning only flickered on the horizon with a blue flame, thunder muttered somewhere in the distance, and the rain tapped evenly under the subsided wind. And I was overcome by fatigue and peace. A melody sounded in my trembling nerves, and a soft relaxation enveloped my body. Oh, to fall asleep with nature and wake up with it! I threw off my clothes and lay down. On the sheets, a soft trace of a strange body still lingered. I felt it vaguely. A strange adventure touched my memory, but its meaning was already escaping me. The rain was rustling, washing away my thoughts. I was living them as if they were a dream. I still strove to return to that mysterious moment, but the rain continued its lulling tune, and I sank into its sleepy depth. In the morning, approaching the window, I saw a transformed world. Clear, distinct, it lay in the sunlight, and above it, a pure horizon was rounded, like a mirror of peace. The fields and trees were sharply outlined, the sky, distant, cold, no longer touching its spouse, the fragrant, freely breathing earth. A blue abyss sparkled between them with coolness, without passion, alien to each other. They exchanged indifferent glances, the sky and the earth.
I went down to the hall. Everyone had already gathered. The people had changed. They were nothing like those who had wandered here during the heavy weeks of exhausting heat. Everything came to life and began to move. Their laughter was joyful, their voices resonant, melodious, and strong. The former sluggishness had disappeared. The burden of the stuffiness that had oppressed them had lifted. I sat down among them, feeling no trace of hostility, and a kind of lively curiosity prompted me to look for the one whose image had recently melted away in my dream. And there she was, at the next table, between her mother and father. Cheerful, with light shoulders, she was laughing a resonant, carefree laugh. I watched her intently. She did not notice me, continuing to tell something funny, weaving a childish, sincere laugh into her speech. But suddenly, by chance, she glanced at me, and her laughter broke off. Her eyes stopped intently on me. Something clearly confused her. Her eyebrows raised, her gaze became strict, tense, a question lit up in it, and a painfully strained expression appeared on her face, as if she was trying to remember something important, and could not. I, full of anticipation, answered her with a direct, attentive gaze, hoping to catch at least the slightest sign of agitation or embarrassment. But she looked away. A minute later, her eyes returned to me, another questioning gaze. For a long, tense second, I felt its sharp, cold metal sting plunged into my very soul, but soon it left me, as if appeased, and by the serene clarity that returned to her eyes, by the light, almost joyful turn of her head, I understood. In a waking state, she knew nothing about me, and the intimacy that had bound us in the magical darkness of the night had disappeared. We had become strangers and distant, like the sky and the earth. She continued to talk to her parents. Her slender shoulders moved easily, and her smile revealed even shiny teeth under thin lips, from which only a few hours ago I had drunk the thirst and languor of an entire world.